Tonight on Big If True, exploiting grief, how random websites rewrite the obituary of a loved one without consent and allegedly republish it for profit. Grateful to have you with us on season 2 of Big If True. I'm Molly Thomas. If you've lost a loved one, you know how difficult those first weeks are. Notifying family near and far, planning all the details of a funeral, perhaps most emotional, writing an obituary that will sum up their life. Now, some grieving families say the memory of their loved one is being exploited. Imagine pouring your heart and soul into an obituary for a loved one, only to see it pop up online, rewritten by someone else. Loving tributes, originally posted by families to funeral sites, are supposedly being scraped and repurposed onto other ones. The sentimental stories and emotional words are altered, and sometimes the new version isn't even accurate. Critics online commonly refer to these companies as obituary pirates, but experts say they are not acting illegally. Still, some families are upset. Many have complained about Ecovita, a Canadian company that says it's building the world's largest free online obituary platform to help families create and share memorials for their loved ones while keeping communities connected in moments of loss. The company says it's pulling from publicly available data. Plus, it says very few families are criticizing them. Instead, it's the funeral industry. Ecovita also sells condolence gifts and says some of its profits go to families through its Solidarity program. The company is clear that its business model complies with all applicable laws. That doesn't seem to be enough for one Canadian pushing back on this practice. A petition to the House of Commons has garnered more than 3,000 signatures to primarily ban the modification of obituaries without family approval. The woman leading the charge on that petition is Catherine Van-Ameed. Her father, Ken, passed away last October. You know, this petition stems out of a very personal moment, right? A time when your father passed. Let's go back to that time. I mean, what was it like actually putting to paper words about his life?
It was difficult. You're trying to summarize someone's entire life in, 250, 300 words, doing them justice, while at the same time there's so much that you just can't capture in that moment. So yeah, it was definitely a difficult thing to write.
How did you find out that there was a different obituary for him than the one that you had put so much of your heart and soul into?
So I had my aunt in town, and I had her proofread the obituary before I submitted it to the funeral home. So she was familiar with it, and once the funeral home told me that the obituary was posted, she went online, just onto Google, and searched, Ken Van-Ameed obituary. And the very first thing that popped up was the Ecovita version of the obituary, which she read and was immediately aware, this is not what you showed me. It's not what I proofread for you. So she showed it to me, and that's kind of how I came to realize that this whole thing was happening.
What were the big differences between the second obituary and the one that you had originally wrote?
First of all, there were some basic factual errors. It assigned his partner to be my partner. It assigned his partner's kids to be his grandkids. And then the whole content of the obituary was completely rewritten. So all of the personal sort of character of it was completely stripped away and replaced with a very generic sort of message around sort of grief and loss.
How did that make you feel?
Livid is probably a good word for it, and also very upset at the same time. This was, only 3 days after my father passed away. And seeing this, it almost felt like a mockery, I suppose would be a good word for it, because it was completely antithetical to who he was as a person and the way it was written. Plus the factual errors were just unbelievable to me.
Mockery is a very strong word. Did you, I think about, someone having to write something like this, like it must take so much out of you just to get that out in the first place, while you're grieving.
Correct. Seeing it rewritten in that way, after putting really your heart and your soul into remembering someone who you're very close to, who you love dearly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it felt insulting, really.
So what did you do? I mean, you're seeing this thing, it's not correct, it's not right, it's not representing your father.
Mm-hmm. I immediately started doing a little bit of research online just to see what the heck was going on with this and reached out to Ecovita through their support page saying, take this down with some strongly worded language involved.
Okay.
I also reached out to their web host, GoDaddy, as well as to Google to try and get it delisted and removed. And I also wrote my MP and my MLA. I was on a bit of a warpath, to be honest with you, just anything that I could do to get this to stop. So,
and how long did that take?
Ecovita had it removed 2 days later, so fairly quickly. In terms of response from the other places I mentioned there, GoDaddy did reach out to me, but at that point, the obituary had been removed already, so there was nothing they could do. I never heard back from Google. And then the MP and the MLA, I did hear back from the next week, and that became its own sort of saga. So.
Catherine, I mean, it seems like quite an ordeal. You know, when we hear from Ecovita, they say that this is publicly available data. It's out there already. People can see it from anywhere in the world. And that's why they're using it. You know, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree that the basic facts of death are public domain. So I have no issue with a website saying, you know, so-and-so died on this day in this place, birthday, birthplace, basic facts. But to then take that and to rewrite the whole obituary as opposed to just those basic facts and a link to the original even would be fine. But when you just go and you rewrite it and then you pair it with these links to sales and donations that have nothing to do with what the deceased might have wanted, and then to not even notify the family that you're doing this in the first place, I mean, that's well beyond, in my mind, appropriate use of public domain around death.
Catherine, do you think if this company had reached out to you and asked you, you would have felt more comfortable?
Yes, I would have felt more comfortable. I would have said no, but I 100% would not have had the same issue that I have now.
You started this petition, you know, you're letting other Canadians know about this. What are you hoping, you know, will come out of that?
I'm hoping that no one else has to deal with this the way that I did. That's really what it boils down to. I think, you know, obituaries, like we've talked about, they're already very difficult to write at a difficult time in someone's life. And this added sort of stress and the added grief is not something anyone should ever have to go through. So I really hope that practice there's a stop put to it, not just with Ecovita, with anyone who tries to do a similar thing.
What would success look like for you?
Success would be making it Canadian law that you can't just go and modify the obituaries or, you know, completely repost them and add sales links to them, anything like that. That should just, as far as I'm concerned, be not okay legally. So I'm really hoping that some change comes out of this.
Catherine, great to have you on the show today.
Thank you again for having me.
We asked Ecovita to respond to the petition to ban modifications of obituaries signed by more than 3,000 Canadians. The company did not respond.
Let's bring in Rebecca Steckley, the president of the Ontario Funeral Service Association, to understand the broader implications. Her organization represents family-owned funeral homes across the province. Rebecca, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
How would you describe, you know, what is happening to families, you know, when obituaries end up on external sites?
I think the best word for it would be exploitation. I feel that these obituaries are being taken from real sources and being changed. The families are being exploited without their consent. They are profiting off of advertising dollars and purchases that people make on their websites. And I guess the number one thing is that, you know, they're doing this without the permission of a grieving family, and it just seems unethical.
Rebecca, how often is this happening?
Oh, we're a fairly small town funeral home. We only do about 200 calls a year, but you know, it's very prevalent. We see it multiple times a year, so I imagine in the larger city regions that they would be seeing it a lot more.
You know what's interesting? So Ecovita, a Canadian company, says very few families are criticizing them. It's actually the funeral homes. And here's a quote from the company I want to read you. They say, "We have evidence that certain funeral homeowners have contacted newspapers and media outlets with false statements and defamatory claims about our company. Likewise, we have examples of cases where funeral homes have blamed us for incorrect information without realizing the error originated from their own website." What would be your response to that?
their tools that they're using does not take into account that changes may be made after the fact. Sometimes a man passes away, his wife gets so stressed out that she has a medical emergency and we have to postpone the date of the visitation. So that change would be made immediately on our website, but it would not follow over to Ecovita because they don't pull any updates from our website. They only pull the initial version. So they don't always have the current information. So it may not be a mistake that we had posted, but a change that the family had made.
Rebecca, I know that you've put out some PSAs, warning people about this. Can funeral homes do anything, to stop it, even prevent it?
Us as funeral directors, I think it's about raising awareness in our communities that these sites do exist. So when, for example, a loved one says, I planted a tree in John's honor, but John's family never gets notified, and a tree may or may not be planted somewhere, it's not right.
Do we have proof of that, Rebecca? You have proof of that? Or people telling you this?
Yes. We'll have families call in saying, I ordered flowers off of your website and the flowers aren't here at visitation, and they're looking for flowers, but they didn't order them through our website. What's happened is they've gone to John's obituary on an outside website, ordered the flowers, and the flowers either don't show up or they show up as a spindly little bouquet of flowers that, is maybe 20% the volume of what they thought that they would be receiving. So it really does seem it's disappointing.
And I want to be clear, that's not specifically in that case Ecovita. That is, a family telling you that an external site is not giving them basically what they paid for. It didn't show up the way that they thought it would. Is the industry talking about, new ways to protect the memory of the deceased? I mean, think of encryption or passwords or anything like that?
That hasn't been brought up. I think it's been more from a legal standpoint about trying to get these websites shut down, and just posting copyright notices on our obituaries so that they can't be taken. But it's just a very gray area of the law right now, and it's something that's being worked at board level.
Yeah, I wonder, if this was done in a more transparent manner, right, with the families, in contact with the funeral homes, do you think that people would even be open to working with external sites if it was all laid out on the table?
Sure, I do. I think that there is something to be said about looking for an obituary where you don't know where someone from high school has moved to. You don't know where they ended up. So if you search their name into a site like that provides, obituaries across Canada, it can be a good tool. But I think the key word there is consent. I think what should be done is, it should be not taking and then, we'll take it down if the family calls us. It should be, we'll contact the family, and if they say it's okay, then absolutely it can be posted. But the family does not have any say as of right now, and it's very distressing.
Rebecca, I really appreciate your thoughts on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
We asked Ecovita for an interview to respond to the claims made in this episode. The company never replied, but it did send an initial statement detailing what the company stands for, as well as outlining some frustrations with the criticism of its work. You can find Ecovita's full statement on our website. Still to come, a tech expert and lawyer joins us to break down the complexity of these cases. But first, Charlie Buckley is here to set the record straight.
It's been a little over a year since Canada put our elbows up and said no to US imports. But that homegrown movement still has some growing pains. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency recently announced fines against grocery stores for falsely labeling products as made in Canada. CBC Radio Canada reports that the mislabeled foods include some French cheese
and a ready-made broccoli slaw south of the border.
Now that may seem like small potatoes, but since last spring, misplaced maple leaves have cost businesses a collective $47,000 in penalties, and counting. How's that for sticker shock? There are a few words more exciting than declassified documents. But what about secret cure for cancer? This month, online posts have claimed that the CIA has known about a miracle cancer treatment since the 1950s. Supposedly, a freshly declassified report proves the CIA kept the cure secret to protect the profits of Big Pharma. Is it true? I'm afraid not. First, the document they're talking about is far from new. It's been publicly available since the Obama administration. But more importantly, it does not reveal the cure for cancer. It's a 2-page summary of some research published in a Soviet science journal. It's kind of like if someone's biology homework was translated from Russian and written by the CIA, but it doesn't suggest any treatments. The truth is that what we call cancer is an umbrella term for hundreds of different conditions, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution. We've made a lot of progress on the road to curing cancer, but so far, there are no shortcuts. Let's say you're a military superpower, and you need a trade route to the Persian Gulf, but your only option is blocked by the Iranian military, and you guys aren't exactly friends. So what do? If your plan is to dig yourself a new one with nuclear bombs, then surprisingly, you're not the only one. Former US House Speaker Newt Gingrich recently shared a post suggesting to use a dozen thermonuclear detonations to dig a canal across this peninsula and allow ships to bypass the blockade, the Strait of Hormuz. The idea came from a clearly satirical blog post, but according to Snopes, it really isn't clear if the congressman knows that. That's your reality check. Now you're in the know.
Coming soon on Big If True, who is fueling conspiracy theories in Canada about global elites, election fraud, and climate change? It's a much smaller group than you might think. All right, back to the websites rewriting obituaries without permission. How are they allowed to take and repurpose these tributes? Ritesh Kotak is both a lawyer and tech and cybersecurity strategist who has been looking into the story. Ritesh, great to have you on the show again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, Ritesh, why are obituaries such an attractive target?
The reason they're attractive is because there's a lot of information that's already out there on the internet. Let's think about it. You have an individual's name, you have their date of birth, you have their date of death. People are looking to find information related to when is the visitation, when is the viewing, when is the actual funeral, what can I do to support this family? So it makes it extremely attractive to be able to scrape that data and use it for different purposes.
So how do these third-party websites, attract so many visitors to their sites?
There are ways of essentially gaming the system. So if you're one of these third parties, there's ways of getting listed higher on those rankings. So if you're putting in the individual's name, maybe you might get the original one from the funeral home lower down on the page, but the first few top ones, whether they're using advertising, so they're promoted links, or the organization has used what we call search engine optimization to get to the top of that list. Most of us are probably going to click on the first link, if not the first or second link that comes out. We're probably not going to scroll all the way down to look for the original one, and that's how people are getting to these pages and these sites.
So Ritesh, this isn't a new issue. How long has it been around?
So this issue has been around literally since the start of the internet. If there was information that could be crawled in, that could be leveraged, individuals have been able to use it. We've seen these types of sites pop up and pop down. Clearly, Afterlife was one of the ones that made one of the biggest splashes, and there was a federal court decision back in 2019 that said that they were infringing on copyright. They were taking obituaries off funeral sites, essentially copying photos, trying to monetize that information. So as a result, the companies that have followed, and there's been some big ones that you've mentioned earlier, what's happened in that case is that they've figured out that there's loopholes in the law and have been able to essentially exploit those loopholes. For example, not using images, potentially using AI generation on the text, such as the obituaries, and also using publicly available information, which you cannot copyright in this instance.
And Ritesh, that case you mentioned, in 2019 with the damages, I mean, that is also, there are some ties, right, to Ecovita and the organization that Catherine, our first guest, had to go and ask for the obituary of her father to be taken down. There is a connection here.
Yeah, there is a connection with respect to the founder, but there's a key distinction here, and that is on the Afterlife case, which was that 2019 decision. The images were being used. It was a direct copy and paste of the obituaries, which was found to be copyright infringement based on the current copyright laws that we have. So how do you get around that? Well, you use AI generators. You change up the text. You put the bare minimum information. You don't use a photograph, and you're not breaking any laws.
So if you are copying word for word, there's a possible copyright infringement. But if you're not, then it's legal.
Essentially, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but yeah, essentially, if you're using an AI generator to change up the text, or you're only using publicly available information, such as an individual's name, the date of birth, the visitation information, that's all public information that anybody can use. So you're technically not breaking copyright law.
Even without consent, Ritesh, because these are families that like put their heart and soul into this. You're telling me even without consent, that's completely legal.
It's legal. At the end of the day, it's public information that's being scraped and used. And in the current framework that we have in Canada, yes, there might be individuals that say this is wrong, but is it illegal? And the short answer is no.
Would stronger privacy laws help, or stronger copyright laws?
We definitely do need to rethink how we deal with these types of situations in the 21st century. The line I always use is we have 21st century problems and we're using 20th century frameworks for it. So yes, a strengthening, looking at copyright law, but more importantly, from a consumer protection perspective, if we really want to stop this from happening, then we would need the government to essentially pass legislation that prohibits the copying or reposting and monetizing information related to obituaries. That's probably the solution.
Let's talk about the consumer. I mean, that's the families here. Can families do anything to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things that families can do. First of all, if you do find your information that's online on this, or a loved one's information that's online by these third parties, you can request that they remove the information in the listing if it comes up on a search engine. And by the way, there's so many of these sites out there, and if it comes up on a search engine, you can potentially report that to the search engine and request that they de-index the listing, so essentially remove it from the results.
You know, I can sympathize with families who want to let, their loved ones know when someone passes, and these online obituaries have made that possible. But I also wonder if we're putting too much of our lives online right now.
I think to say that, I'm going to go completely dark and I'm not going to have a presence, and am I putting too much of my life online? Our lives have become digital. This is the way that we're going to have to operate. We can't live go dark anymore. That's just, that ship has sailed. So it comes down to, how are we going to strengthen consumer protection, strengthen cybersecurity, privacy legislation to ensure that individuals' digital rights and physical rights are protected in the social cyber digital age that we currently reside in.
Giving us lots to think about, and now more people know about it. Ritesh, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Worried about misinformation overload? Come to Big If True to find out what's real and what's not. Check out our Instagram page for exclusive content, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or watch full episodes on our website. Email us at bigiftrue@tvo.org if you have a burning question or brilliant idea. Big If True, fighting misinformation one story at a time.
The death of a loved one is a very difficult season, and our hearts go out to anyone further traumatized during their grief. By the way, you can request that external sites take down any obituary info you're uncomfortable with, so make use of that. Have a great week, folks. We will see you next Sunday or anytime online.